Well, happy Monday, everybody. Hope you had a wonderful weekend and you were able to worship the Lord Sunday. Today, for our devotion, we are in the book of Galatians, chapter 1. So go ahead and open there. And let me remind everyone that this Friday and Saturday, October 10 and 11, is the Apologetics Conference here at First Baptist Church. And then that Sunday morning, next Sunday, October 12, we will not have our regular schedule. No life groups. And instead of having our normal worship services, we're going to have two gatherings, and you are asked to attend both, one at 9 o'clock, the other at 10:30. At 9 o'clock, we'll have a little bit of music, and then Brother Hugh Ross is going to talk about artificial intelligence from a Christian biblical perspective, AI. Very, relevant topic for today. And then at 10:30, we'll have a break, come back at 10:30, a little bit more music, and then Corey Miller is going to speak about what's going on at major universities and some of the stuff that the seculars are trying to do, but also what we as followers of Jesus are trying to do. It's going to be very, very, very informative. And for those of you who are parents, especially, you'll want to be here for that. So 9 o'clock, 10:30, be here for both sessions Sunday morning. Now, some of you are wondering, why did we leave Acts and jump to Galatians? We finished reading back in, chapter 17 or 18, rather, Paul's second missionary journey. Returns to his home church of Antioch, and then he'll begin his third missionary journey. Galatians is a book that was written by the Apostle Paul, and he wrote it either during his second missionary journey or at the end of it, maybe slightly after his second missionary journey. I won't go into all the minutia of how we know that, but that's when he wrote it. Galatia was, you remember how I mentioned the other day, Pontus was a Roman province in the northern part of Turkey. Galatia was a Roman province kind of in the central part of the country and down to the south. It's in that area where Paul and Barnabas started new churches on their first missionary journey that Paul revisited to encourage them on his second missionary journey. Now, near the end of his second missionary journey, or at the end of it, he writes this letter to Galatians. It's a circular letter that will be circulated among the various churches in that part of the country. And he's doing that because there's some issues in the church. Now, much of the first chapter, Paul recounts his biography, if you will. Paul is saved on the road to Damascus when he's persecuting Christians. That takes place somewhere around 34 AD, not long after the resurrection of Jesus. And he wraps up his biography here by his visit to Jerusalem. Now, he was in Jerusalem more than once. This is the visit that is recorded in the book of Acts, chapter 9. Paul is saved in Damascus, and then Acts jumps to him visiting Jerusalem. What Acts does not tell, because remember, Acts is not trying to give us every historical detail. It skips over, doesn't record something that Paul mentions in Galatians 1, that after he was converted and then had to flee Damascus, Paul spent 3 years in Arabia, where God was getting him ready for ministry. And then after that, he returned to Damascus and then back down to Jerusalem. So there's a 3-year period that Acts doesn't tell us about. So putting all this together, Paul is converted somewhere around 34 AD and makes the visit to Jerusalem that's in Acts chapter 9, that he alludes to here in Galatians 1, around 37 to 38 AD. And so that's kind of the timeline. Now, and there's a reason he's giving them that biography. He's setting the table for some of the teaching that he's going to do, and also establishing his authority to teach them. He established those churches. He wanted them to know his experience. And what had started happening was bad teaching, bad doctrine had started creeping into those churches. In verses 6 and 7, he said, "I am amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another. Only there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. You'll learn more about this later in the book of Galatians, but briefly what's happening is, has happened many times in the New Testament, some Christians of Jewish background who believed you needed to obey the law, you needed to be circumcised before you believe in Jesus, or for your belief in Jesus to be legitimate. Remember, we read all about that back in Acts chapter 15 in what we call the Jerusalem Council, which had already happened by the time Paul wrote Galatians. But those who believe that didn't give up. And so they have started coming to these churches in south central Turkey, in the region of Galatia, started teaching that and was tearing up the church. And some people were reverting to legalism and saying, well, I need to be circumcised so I can be sure I'm saved. A different gospel. That's what Paul is addressing in the letter to the Galatians. And in verses 8 and 9, he says, if anybody comes preaching to you a gospel contrary to faith in Jesus, reject it. It's wrong. Doesn't matter who's doing it. So he's going to build a very solid argument about this in the rest of the book of Galatians. And we're reading this because this is happening while Paul is finishing up his second missionary journey that we just read about in the book of Acts. So that's why we're doing it this way. Now, devotionally, I want you to look at verse 15 of chapter 1, verse 15. But when God, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb and called me through his grace. Paul is in chapter 1. Remember I said he's recounting his testimony, his journey from conversion up into years later. And in telling his story, he says God set him apart while he was in his mother's womb, and through God's grace, the Apostle Paul was called into ministry. That is very similar to what Jeremiah, the Old Testament prophet, said. In verses 4 and 5 in Jeremiah chapter 1, we read this. Now the word of the Lord came to me, this is Jeremiah, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. Now, I think you can understand why what Jeremiah said and what Paul says here resonates with me as a preacher. God had a plan for Paul and Jeremiah before they were born, planned to call them into ministry. They could have disobeyed God's call. They could have rebelled against God's plan and not fulfilled it. Thankfully, they did not do that. Instead, they obeyed God. They followed the call. They did what God called them to do. These passages always touch me on a very deep level because I think I can say that God reached down from heaven into the rural mountains of the Kentucky coal fields and called me to a life that otherwise I could never have imagined living. Had a plan for me. And I'm thankful I didn't resist it, that I followed it. And I want to say God has a plan for your life. Whether you follow his plan or resist it is your choice because he creates you with free will. He really does. But he has a plan for you. And to live God's plan down the road means we listen to and follow his promptings and callings today. Today prepares for tomorrow. I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing with you right now. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity, the privilege I have of doing these devotions. And the thousands of people who listen to and watch these. I would not be here doing this if in the past I'd not listened to promptings of God. Obedience today creates opportunities tomorrow. Obedience tomorrow creates opportunities the day after tomorrow. God always has a plan. We find it, we discover it by following the prompting step by step, day by day. And then you can look back see the hand of God. But if you don't listen to the voice of God, it's hard to look back and see his hand because you've missed his plan. And I don't want you to miss God's plan for your life. And you might say, well, Pastor, I'm 40 years old, I'm 50 years old, and I've missed it to this point. Well, guess what? God's not done with you. Start listening to him today, and God has stuff for you to do tomorrow. You can't change the past, but with Jesus, you can change the future. That's the word for today. I'll see you tomorrow as we look at Galatians 2. God bless you.